Hello everyone, it's New York Rail Fan 202 here, and I will be continuing my series Engines of Metro North. And in this episode, I will be discussing the Bud M2, M4, and M6. Now let's get started. In the late 1960s, Penn Central was using EMU cars that dated back to the 1920s and ran on the New Haven Railroad. In 1968, the New Haven Railroad was merged into Penn Central, which included the New York Central Railroad and the Pennsylvania Railroad. Even though this merger was supposed to prevent these railroads from going bankrupt, it did not prevent them from being short on funds. Penn Central, therefore, did not have the money to replace these extremely outdated EMU cars. Some of these cars were almost 6 years old and were in desperate need of replacement. Just as an example, Penn Central's main EMU for the New Haven line was the Pullman 4400, which entered service in 1915 on the good old New Haven Railroad and should have been replaced long ago. When Penn Central filed for bankruptcy in 1970, the MTA, rather than discontinue commuter service in the New York City area, started to fund their commuter service on the Hudson and Harlem lines, as many New Yorkers still preferred to commute by train. The Connecticut Department of Transportation would fund the New Haven line along with the MTA due to it running in between those two states. However, service on all these lines would still be operated by Penn Central. With this new funding, money could be acquired to pay for a new order of cars to replace all of the current fleet. The Harlem and Hudson lines were finally receiving funding after many years of neglect. The EMUs on these lines were in the same condition or worse than those on the New Haven line. And just like the EMUs on the New Haven line, replacement finally was possible. The MTA wanted to replace the old EMUs with a new modern and fast design. Bud answered to the MTA with the M1, which would be part of his new series of EMUs called Cosmopolitans, which would be unlike any other EMU in operation at the time. The Cosmopolitans would have a new sleek look with non-openable windows and were made even more comfortable with air conditioning. These cars would be capable of 100 miles per hour and only accommodate high-level boarding platforms, which would mean that all the platforms in the electrified territory of the railroad would need to be upgraded. They would also have modern innovations like cab signaling and automatic train control to prolong their useful lives. With the M1 proving extremely popular with the commuters on the Harlem and Hudson lines, the MTA and Condot looked for a new similar EMU for the New Haven line. Bud answered to the MTA again with the M2, which would have all the amenities of the M1 and meet the operating requirements on the New Haven line. Now on to the specifications. The M2, just like all the other Cosmopolitans, would be capable of 100 miles per hour. However, just like all the other Metro North EMUs, they would be limited to 80 miles per hour in service. The four GE 1259 DC traction motors each put out 162 horsepower for a total of 648 horsepower per car. The cars would be 85 feet long, 10 feet wide, and 13 feet high, and weigh 126,500 pounds. These cars would be in a married pair configuration, unlike the previous EMUs, meaning that each two-car pair would have two semi-permanently connected cars with a cab on one end, and they would be joined at the end that did not have a cab. The cars would look extremely similar to the M1 apart from the obvious electrical equipment on the roof of the M2s, and would contain the New York and Connecticut state seals, as the line was jointly funded by both the states. Penn Central accepted their first M2 in 1973, and after some testing, were put into service later that same year. The first order of 144 cars was completed in 1974, and a second order for 100 more cars was placed in 1975 and was completed in 1977. Shortly after the second order was placed, in 1976, Penn Central would be merged with other failing Northeastern railroads into Conrail, and thus, Conrail would now operate the New Haven line. When Conrail took over operation of the New Haven line, it did what Penn Central had wanted to do for a long time: retire the tired fleet of pre-war EMUs. After the retirement of those cars, EMU commuter service on the line would now be fully provided by the M2. This change brought reliable service to the New Haven line, and ridership would start to increase after years of decline. To add to the passenger amenities, the M2 was also purchased in a bar car configuration, something absent from the M1 and other commuter railroads. These cars would serve drinks and light snacks on express trains and would be solely for the purpose of passenger comfort. Condot and the MTA each purchased 10 bar cars for a total of 20 bar cars. In the 1980s, ridership had increased on the Harlem, Hudson, and New Haven lines, which caused trains to be frequently overcrowded due to rolling stock shortages. This shortage was not helped with the addition of more electrified trackage from North White Plains to Southeast on the Harlem line, requiring more EMUs for service on that line. The MTA wanted Bud to produce a more modern version of the M1 for service on the Harlem and Hudson lines, and Bud did exactly what the MTA wanted and produced the Bud M3. A similar plan was supposed to be done for the New Haven line, with Budd producing a more modern version of the M2. However, financial difficulties at Budd made the company unable to produce the car, and later the company would file for bankruptcy. The MTA and Condot looked to find another builder, and once they had the rights to design of the M2, the Tokuyu Car Corporation produced the M4. The M4 was very similar to the M2 that came before it, with only one notable difference. It was in a 3-car set, giving them the nickname triplets. They were not in the married pair configuration, but other than that, they're basically the same as the M2 that came before them. The MTA and Condot ordered 54 M4 cars and received their first in 1987, and got their last one a year later in 1988. With ridership further increasing on the New Haven line, even more cars were needed, causing the MTA and Condot to look for another version of the M2. Morse Knudsen would be the builder of this new version, called the M6. The M6 was extremely similar to the M4. It came in the same 3-car set, giving it the same nickname as the M4, triplets. However, it would be just as similar to the M2 as the M4 that came before it. The MTA and Condot would order 48 M6 cars and receive their first in 1994 and would receive all 48 that same year. In the 21st century, ridership on the railroad was increasing and the cars were at their end of their service lives. Some of the oldest M2s had reached 1 million miles in all types of weather conditions. However, financial difficulties at the MTA and Condot meant there was no money for a replacement. In 2006, the companies finally had enough money to seek a replacement. Bombardier was a serious bidder and was going to build a successor to the M2, just as they had done for the M1 on the Harlem and Hudson lines. However, the deal never came to be, and the MTA and Condot chose Kawasaki to build these new cars that would eventually be called the M8. The first M8s would arrive on Metro-North property in 2011, and after some testing, they entered service shortly after in that same year. Upon the delivery of the M8s, the railroad started the process of removing the M2, M4, and M6s from service. These cars started to be withdrawn in 2012 and subsequently scrapped. In 2014, the last Metro-North train to contain a bar car made its run, and that ended bar car service on Metro-North. In 2015, all M4s and M6s were retired, and this left only 32 M2s in service. However, in 2016, it would announce they would be replaced by 2019 with the M8 as well. The M2 should be all gone from the New Haven line in just a few short years. As for preservation of these cars, none have been sent to any museums at the time of making this video. All M2s, M4s, and M6s that are not currently in service are slowly being sent away for scrap, with 2 exceptions. 2 M6 sets were donated to the MTA Canine Police Training Center for training purposes, but as of now, no cars have been properly preserved. The M2s had a long service life, bringing commuters up and down the New Haven line, and even though they were supplemented by newer cars, they outlasted them in the end. They came at a time where a new car purchased for the New Haven line had been needed for decades. Even though 32 M2s are still in service, their days are numbered. That is all about the Budd M2, M4, and M6. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, why not leave a like? Leave a comment about anything else and be sure to vote in the top right of the screen on what piece of equipment I should do next. And I hope to see you in the next video. And to make sure that I do see you, why not subscribe? And as always, keep rail fanning.